It's often noted that the trains which pump through tunnels underneath our feet downtown and barrel over bridges into Cambridge, Quincy, and beyond belong to the most ancient subterranean transit matrix in America. Aside from being a great historical first, the fact that the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority's earliest forerunner first rolled more than a century ago is sometimes used to rationalize the pitiful physical state of everything from T-stations to tracks to bridges and the iron tortoises themselves. More than just a little ink has been spilled by journalists and policy experts explaining the nightmare. It's a doozy, rife with numbers and statistics that don't seem to add up. For starters, state lawmakers know how much it'll cost to bring things up to speed, but year after year after year, they neglect to make the appropriate changes. The rest of us, meanwhile, are expected to simply accept the fact that lines slow down or even stop in extreme weather, and that chunks of platform overhangs may crash upon our heads at any minute. There have been millions of dollars marked for noteworthy projects over the past year. Among other fixes, the MBTA has greenlit money for additional resiliency measures like track upgrades and a new third rail for the Red Line, as well as major signal improvements on the green, red, and orange lines. Still, the efforts more or less amount to an enormous box of bureaucratic band-aids. This, as the women and men who work for the T, from repair shops to the tracks, are frequently maligned by mainstream news outlets and politicians on both sides of the aisle. To illustrate this pressing issue in a new light, the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism asked ace photographer Derek Kouyoumjian to spend a month over the winter snapping photographs of utterly dilapidated MBTA tracks, stations, and trains. His images of so much beautiful decay, meant to scare the crap out of you and perhaps even spur a couple of riders into action, appeared as a photo essay titled CONDEMBTA, which serves as the centerpiece of this installment of Beyond Boston, on which our central goal is always to connect people in different communities who are concerned about the same issues. On that note, what could make a better topic than the MBTA? Before we get into the clips for this month, though, I also want to introduce the footage that you'll see from an event we held for the CONDEMBTA feature at Work Bar in Cambridge. Some people from the Mass Department of Transportation were unhappy that we didn't invite any T administrators to defend themselves. After the panel, I told one of them the same thing that I'll tell you, that Massachusetts lawmakers and MBTA officials and privatization proponents and the consultants that the state hires for millions of dollars each year, they have had their say. We hear it every time we watch the trash they're peddling on mainstream television news. And in a way, we hear it in the creaks and screams of trains that should have been removed from service years ago. We aren't interested in their spin. This is a platform for perspectives that are shut out of the mainstream, particularly T workers, T activists and advocates, and of course, people like you, T riders. So enjoy.
A panel and photo exhibition about the infrastructure of public transportation in Greater Boston area was held on June 28th in Cambridge. The panel, called CONDEMBTA, was open to all T riders in the city for raising more attention on the aging properties.
So the purpose of the event is basically to bring the public in and let them know basically what's going around privatization of the MBTA. There's a hostile takeover of the public good that's happening under the Baker administration, and we're here to inform people on things that they're not able to learn themselves through the natural news media or any other venue, because the MBTA hasn't been very transparent on any of the contracts that they've been putting out in the privatization plans that they have for the services on the MBTA.
The artistic part of the show is art by Derek Kouyoumjian, who's a photographer for our paper DigBoston. Derek went around for a month and took photos, which some are printed out here, that show the deterioration of public transportation in the Boston area, how the tracks are not so good, the the cars are not so good, the stations are not so good, and it's a public good, and we need it properly funded, so we're doing the event.
What really hit me was again, seeing things like Central Spur Station. I can remember when the train station was very dim and dark. It was a very dismal looking train station. And then in the late 80s, they renovated it and made it very spiffy and cute, and they extended the platform to accommodate 6 train cars. It looked great, and that was 1989, 1990, and now it seemed like pillars really corroding away.
Participants are expressing their opinions about the panels and public transportation as well.
Whether it's going to change anything, I have my doubts. It's one thing to talk about it, but because the government is firmly in the hands of the automotive industry, it would be very difficult to make any real changes, and especially with the current administration.
Right now, it's to stop the privatization. They're trying and save the middle class jobs. Because right now they're trying to sell off the key to private industries. So right now we're fighting to keep what we have. I really think they need more bus service, but there's a traffic problem, there's a parking problem.
I don't really see wide representation here in this meeting, so I wanted to know what was being done to make efforts like this more inclusive of people from different racial, ethnic, cultural backgrounds.
For Brookline Interactive Group, Ronnie Lee and Ray Huang report.
Hi, I'm Haley Hamilton, staff writer with BINJ, and I'm here with John Doherty, the lead coordinator of the Invest Now Coalition, a group of Massachusetts labor organizations fighting for a modern public transportation in our state. Thanks for coming on, John.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So when we think about public transportation in Boston and in Mass, we know the T is a little slower than we'd like. A lot of us feel frustrated and inconvenienced with our commutes, but it's a bigger issue than being frustrated or inconvenienced for a lot of people in the state. Can you talk a little bit about how this is a labor issue as well as a social justice issue?
Absolutely. So it's a labor issue in the sense that the T is grossly underfunded. There's been a model of divestment that's gone through years and years that has basically brought it to where it is. You have 15 different models of trains that are being worked on at all different times, from years going back 70 years, the Mattapan trolley line. So in order to provide a more modern, reliable service, there needs to be more investment in the MBTA to get those workers that are performing those jobs better tools, better access to technology that can provide a more sustainable MBTA.
Awesome. And what are some realistic ways we could go about doing that?
One of those ways is right now there's a millionaire's tax being proposed at the State House. That's one way that can be helped, but I think one of the biggest ways right now is the Mass MBTA Transparency Amendment.
Okay.
It's number 1031 and was proposed by Senator Keenan. That goes to show who's actually involved in the process of procurement and what kind of contracts are going out in the MBTA. Right now, there's a lot of consultants involved, including McKinsey & Company, who has a global reputation for aggressively pushing privatization models that result in a lot of different factors for the MBTA. You have less socioeconomic integration. People, are cut services in areas like you've seen the issue with Keolis not too long ago, where there was slower train service, so they used the Fairmont line in order to provide service for more well-off areas. There's no reason why it should come from one train line. But there's a whole host of issues, especially through privatization, that result in cuts in services, lower wages, and higher fares.
Okay. And privatization, so what does that look like for this particular issue? That's going to be, talk to me about privatization a little bit.
So privatization is something that was actually always a factor. Even with the Taxpayer Protection Act, it was a factor because if they could provide, either as good or better service with no cuts to jobs, then they could push a contract into privatization. Rather than do that, they don't negotiate in good faith with the workers that are on the T right now with their unions. And every single privatization contract and effort to outsource so far has been a major disaster.
Okay.
You look at even the janitorial services, ended up in cutting hours, cutting service, and cutting regulations for workers, and ultimately cutting wages for workers. The worst being Keolis, who comes in, they give you numbers that you want to see through these consultant firms that they pay up to $3 million on, and some of them are coming directly from the company that is getting the contract after the fact, if you look at the money room.
Okay.
So there's a number of ways that transparency and the ability to see into who the players are on these contracts creates a lot more accountability, which in turn creates efficiency, creates savings, things like that. At least the taxpayer knows where their dollars are going.
Okay, so and that transparency measure is going to be voted on soon.
Yes, that's an amendment in the budget that's getting ready to be voted on now. So we urge all the taxpayers out there to contact their representatives, their senators, and support this amendment in the budget.
Absolutely. Okay, fantastic. Another thing we definitely wanted to talk about while I have you here is how the economic development of the T, it helps the whole state.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the MBTA could actually be an economic driver, especially with all the transit-oriented development going on. It's important that we keep it modern and reliable and that people pay for it. Look who benefits from it. There's a ton of corporations that have moved into the city or around the state that benefit from having their workers and employees use the MBTA transit system. Our population as a whole is growing. It's expanding, exponentially every year. We definitely need to take more cars off the road. It helps with the climate, the carbon imprint. But having that system in place and getting people to work every day is what drives the economy in Massachusetts.
Absolutely. Speaking of driving the economy, people getting to and from work, we know that housing prices and rents in Boston are a huge issue right now. So for a lot of people who are being pushed further and further outside of the city, if they don't have access to public transportation, what does that do for them? What are the communities that are really being affected?
Right, absolutely. So you look at cities or towns and you see a lot of the corporations moving into the center of town. You see the luxury development that's being built up around it. And you see people being pushed out further and further, creating a much wider socioeconomic divide. Those people need to get to work. If they can't get to work, they can't pay taxes. They can't put food on the table. We really need a reliable system, and not something that it benefits only the well-off areas. Something that gets people a foothold in the economy, and creates a place for them that they're able to make Massachusetts better as well.
Absolutely. So getting back to transparency and what people, residents can actually do to see change in the MBTA, is getting that transparency bill passed something that will help them get some benefit out of their transit system?
Absolutely. The MBTA is the least transparent department inside the Massachusetts state government. Given transparency back to watchdog groups, back to the taxpayers, back to journalists like yourself, and really getting in and seeing what's going on, where those tax dollars are going, can only make it more efficient. It can only help out the taxpayer that's trying to get back and forth to work. It can only help out that family that's riding the T every day in order to put food on the table. I think the case for not having transparency, I think, is actually transparent. So, so I think the public coming out and supporting this bill is kind of a win-win. It's a no-brainer. I think everybody benefits from it. The corporations themselves benefit from it because it creates competition. They know who is actually playing, in the pot and where that money's going. And it really should go back to the taxpayers of Massachusetts. It should go back to the workers that work on the T, and it should absolutely go back to the people that have to ride the T every single day.
Awesome. Thanks so much, John. All right, up next we have some more news from beyond Boston.
On March 14th, a new mobile parking app, Passport Parking, launched in Brookline. This app allows drivers to pay by their phones and extend their parking sessions from anywhere, and sends mobile reminders when the time on the meter is almost expired. Some people don't know about the parking app, and they do struggle a lot parking in Brookline.
I keep a roll of quarters in my car. So I work just down the street at the Boston Graduate School of Psychoanalysis, so I'm here a couple of days a week, and I try every couple of hours to get out and move my car for the first few chunks of the day, and then I use my quarters. It's very inconvenient. Very.
It's a hassle. It is inconvenient. You have to go wait at the bank. You have to spend time, driving there. You have to pick up quarters, and then you have to keep them in your car and keep them handy. So, yeah, it's a pain.
Daniel told me he will use Passport Parking in Brookline because by using the parking app in Boston, he not only got less ticket himself, but most importantly, he could prove that he paid.
Okay, honestly, I like it because I used my credit card a couple of times in Boston, and even though there was money in the meter, I got a ticket anyway. And when I tried to dispute it, I didn't have a receipt, so they told me I was out of luck. And now with the app, I take a screenshot every time I park, so I save that. So if I get a ticket, I can prove I paid for it.
According to Transportation Administrator Todd Kieran, a 30-cent convenient fee is charged every time we use the Passport app. People have very different opinions about that.
30 cents? Maybe. I'd consider it. Sure. Yeah. I drive a lot and I park a lot around Brookline.
From my point of view, we're paying enough in the number of quarters it costs us per hour that I wouldn't really want an extra 30 cents fee.
It is reported that people were overcharged by the parking app. In response to this, Town Transportation Administrator Kieran said it was because of a programming error, which affected less than 3% of all pay-by-cell transactions in the town of Brookline. The reprogramming of the app was completed within the week. The refunds were processed to everyone too. The town staff was very responsive to the issues, and some people do think paying by mobile devices is more convenient compared to other paying methods. There's still one recommendation provided by a Brookline resident.
My recommendation is an app. It will solve a lot of issues, in my opinion, in terms of meters and people that working around, just by putting a small gadget very similar to the Easy Pass, and this way it goes directly paid. You can fill it up, so actually the town already has the money even before you parked. What the best idea is going to be.
For Brookline Interactive Group, I'm Ronnie Lee.
Over the years, I've often written about how to improve public transportation in the Bay State. But this time out, rather than rehash my standing call for the legislature to raise taxes on the rich and corporations to properly fund such a necessary service, I'd like to take a different tack and discuss a topic germane to the future of both transportation in general and public transportation in particular. Specifically, the so-called ride-sharing industry pioneered by corporations like Uber and Lyft. Ride-sharing is a transportation system in which riders and drivers interact via software on cell phones rather than going through human dispatchers. The software allows riders to see which drivers are near them and to have the closest one assigned to them. It provides price estimates for rides, features seamless automatic payments from rider to driver at the end of each trip, and it incentivizes simple but important things like drivers keeping their vehicles clean. One would think this ride-sharing system would be great for riders and drivers alike, but that's not the case. The problem with ride-sharing is that it's really not ride-sharing. That is, Uber and Lyft and smaller companies like Fasten completely control their operations from top to bottom, including the economic structure that determines how much riders will pay in fares and what cut of those fares go to drivers. This system is non-transparent and largely unregulated. An actual ride-sharing system would be controlled by its riders and drivers. It could, and I would posit should, be publicly managed. In short, rather than allow ride-sharing companies to assist in the dismantling of existing public transit systems like the MBTA by gradually privatizing them, those systems or agencies set up by individual cities could run municipal ride-sharing services at cost. Fares would be regulated in ways that would ensure riders the best fares, which poor and working-class riders would be able to consistently afford. A small percentage of each fare would go to the municipal rideshare service to develop and maintain the necessary software and infrastructure. Then all the extra money that presently flows into the coffers of Uber and Lyft, top brass and investors would be paid to drivers in the form of the best possible wages. Such a service would be an excellent adjunct to public trains and buses and would make it much easier for everyone to get from point A to point B. Plus, it would be far more democratic because it could be organized to ensure that riders and drivers would play a large role in managing the service. It could even be run as a hybrid of a consumer and a worker cooperative, and democratically controlled from top to bottom, restricting the growth of Uber and Lyft to something like their natural share of the private transportation market by its mere existence. Going the public route, or at least a similar nonprofit route being experimented with by Ride Austin in Austin, Texas, would satisfy the needs of the loyal base of Uber and Lyft clients by providing comparable service at a better price point. And it would also satisfy the needs of a whole new layer of riders who will be able to afford access to new municipal ride-sharing services on a regular basis, in addition to public buses, trolleys, and trains, all while paying living wages to drivers, who are, after all, the backbone of the current corporate ride-sharing system, but who are also the most exploited by it. For Beyond Boston, I'm Jason Pramas.